Last part of this piece. As they drove back to Kingston, Brian behind the wheel. By this time it was late evening. The car was quiet for about the first hour of the journey as both men tried to process the experience. By the time they got to the roundabout at Harborview, they started to talk. In fact, Brian turned down the Palisades Road and they wound up in Port Royal. Over a couple of cold Guinnesses and some steamed fish at Gloria's restaurant, they talked about what had happened. Well, John did most of the talking actually. He started by explaining what had happened after they had finished at the altar. Dalton had taken him back into the house where he had dried off and changed, and he had been counseled to confess to his wife. And he had also been assured that the spirit of his dead child would no longer be bothering him. All this had cost John the tidy sum of 50,000 Jamaican dollars. He had also told Brian about Sandra and the abortion and spoke of his grief and guilt. Brian was stunned but sympathetic. Life is a funny thing and shit tends to happen. So, you think this thing worked? Brian asked finally. This whole heap of praying and bath and thing. Not to mention the money. I don't know, brethren. I couldn't tell you. I guess it's only one way I'm going to find out. John did know one thing though. Brother Dalton, or no Brother Dalton, he could no longer keep the story of his lost child from his wife. He had to tell her, even if it cost him his marriage. He owed her that no matter what. He had already waited for far too long to do so. That night, John asked Carol to take a walk with him. His unusual seriousness got her attention immediately, and she wondered what was wrong. They held hands as they hiked up the hill, and eventually made their way through a short path onto a narrow ledge at the top of a steep cliff. Someone had constructed a bench there where people could sit and drink in the stunning view of the city of Kingston laid out below them, all the way out across Kingston Harbour and the Caribbean Sea beyond. They sat quietly for a while enjoying the view. Then John turned to his wife. I have something to tell you. Something I should have told you a long 5 years ago, he began. He told her everything. About the abortion, Sandra, how they had met, the subsequent nightmares, his trip out to St. Thomas, everything. Carol listened to him without interruption, her eyes never leaving his face. John finished by admitting that he had been a liar and a fool, but that he loved her and did not want to lose her. He begged her forgiveness and for her not to leave him. What happened next completely floored him. I know, Carl said simply. Not about the barnyard stuff, but I know about Sandra. In fact, I have known for a long time. John almost had a stroke on the spot. What? How? Seriously, how come? Yes, baby, I know. I know because I've met Sandra. I've spoken to her. Carol explained that she had met Sandra not once but twice. The first time Sandra had come to visit her was about 2 years after they had got married. Sandra had told Carol that she had seen their wedding photo in the social pages of the Daily Gleaner, one of our national newspapers. And the story noted that Carol worked at the University Hospital of the West Indies as a nurse. Sandra had visited her there and they had had a long talk. Sandra said that she felt that Carol had a right to know about what had happened between them, that she had eventually forgiven John for what had happened, and that she was no longer angry with him. Sandra also mentioned that she had used the money that John had given her to make a fresh start in life. She had restarted evening classes and at that point had been planning to get into teaching. She had also got a job working as a cashier in a supermarket. She was not exactly rolling in wealth, but she was managing. Sandra had appealed to Carol to not hold what John had done against him. He is at heart a good man, Sandra had said. It had taken everything Carol had to not end the marriage then. But she knew deep down that Sandra was right. John was a good, decent man who had made a terrible mistake. That had eventually convinced her to stay with him. Their second meeting had happened about a year previously, this time by chance. They had run into each other in a department store while both had been out shopping. They had had lunch together, and over lunch, Sandra had told her that she had, in fact, passed her CXCs, had attended Michael Teachers College, and was now teaching at a school in Spanish Town. She was doing okay. John and Carol continued to talk for some time and eventually went home, walking hand in hand. Their lovemaking that night was far more intense and deep than it had ever been, and in doing so, on an almost elemental level, they reassured each other of their love and commitment to each other. And when John finally fell asleep, his dreams were happy ones, in which laughing and smiling children played with each other, and their smiles were reflected by the contented smile on his face. And that's it. Thank you.